Hi everyone, welcome back to Ying. I'm Angela. Today we're talking about something that doesn't get nearly enough attention in combat sports, and that's how to actually learn better. When you hear learning, you might think that this is going to be some academic, boring breakdown of theory, but stick with me because understanding how your brain processes new skills is one of the most practical things that you can apply to your Muay Thai training. Most fighters are obsessed with training harder. So we're talking about more rounds, more sessions, more intensity, more everything. And don't get me wrong, that effort matters and does count towards something. But if you're not paying attention to how you're training, you're leaving a ton of progress that could be applied within that time. You're leaving it on the table. Top elite fighters, they're not just working the hardest, but they're also understanding how to structure their sessions so that what it is that they practice actually shows up in the gym. So today we're breaking down the science behind efficient learning, why the order of your training matters more than you think, advanced tools for skill retention, and how something as simple as keeping track of your training can make you a better fighter. So let's get into it. First, let's talk about cognitive load theory. It sounds dense, but in simpler terms, it means your brain has a limited capacity for processing new information. So you can think of your working memory kind of like a funnel. New information, like a technique your coach just showed you, it has to pass through that funnel in order to get to your long-term memory. But if the funnel is clogged with too much stuff at once, aka information overload, all of those new details, it gets lost. And it gets worse when you add in stress and pressure, because that shrinks the funnel even more. So if we're talking about a training setting, right? So let's say you're sparring. You're sparring and your coach is yelling 3 different corrections at you at the same time while you're trying to not get kicked in the face. Your brain literally can't process all of that happening. You're cognitively overloaded. This is why some sessions can feel like everything just like clicked, and other sessions feel like you learned absolutely nothing, even if you physically worked just as hard. So how can we fix something like this? So the first tool I'll introduce to you is, maybe this is not something you can necessarily control, but if you are in a position of coaching or even giving feedback to any of your coaches, it's to keep instructions clear and concise. If you're a coach, or even when you're training with a partner, avoid being redundant. Don't overload someone with unnecessary information along the key point that you're trying to teach. For example, instead of saying, okay, so when you throw the teep, make sure your hips are forward, your toes are pointed, your guard is up, and you're exhaling in hat. And also don't forget to reset your stance after. Just say hips forward, exhale impact. Exhale as you're throwing the teep. Give the brain just 1 or 2 things to focus on, and that's it. I've had trainers where between rounds, they were trying to tell me to do like so many things that I had nothing to focus on during that round. So I just felt like I was kind of swinging in the dark, even though there were all these directions being thrown at me at one time. Yeah, that wasn't fun. And tool number 2 is to focus your attention on one source. This is called the split attention effect. When it happens when you're trying to watch a demonstration and read complex notes and listen to verbal cues all at the same time. And sometimes this is what training can feel like, because there's so many inputs of information coming in at once, and your brain can't do all of those things equally as well efficiently. So do keep in mind that everyone learns differently, but just know, like, if someone's expecting you to do all 3 well at the same time, especially when you're learning something new, it's better to just focus on one source of information. So you can watch it, then drill it. Don't try to multitask your way through learning something new. Okay, tool number 3. Let's scaffold based on skill level. This one is huge and something that a lot of gyms get wrong. Beginners need full demonstration. So we're talking about worked examples of what the technique should look like. They need to see the whole picture from beginning to end. They need to see it slow. They need to know like exactly the steps that go into it, like what side of your foot is doing what arm is doing what. Intermediate fighters tend to benefit a little bit more from, I guess we can call them completion tasks, like here's the first half of the combo, now you finish it. So this is adding in something with structure with a little bit of freestyling. This helps them to be engaged because there is a segment of it where they are applying what it is that they already know, along with some structure and direction without overwhelming them. When it comes to advanced practitioners, advanced fighters, they need more of a problem-solving aspect to it. With more advanced practitioners, their long-term memory already has the foundational stuff. So you can give them independent tasks to let them figure it out. This works up their working memory so they can focus a little bit more on strategy and tactics because they already have this foundation, which is not something that beginners necessarily have. So if you're a beginner and your coach is treating you like an advanced fighter, so basically kind of throwing you in a way where you have to problem solve by yourself when you don't have that foundation, throwing you into complex drills without breaking them down, you're going to feel lost. So I feel like when people come to Thailand to train and they're at a gym that is used to training pro fighters, this is a common issue that they run into, where they're just kind of thrown into a thing, but they don't have the other foundational techniques to be able to work their way up to it or understand when is appropriate situation to use this technique. If this is you and do feel lost, just know that that's not on you. That's definitely a coaching issue. Now let's talk about how you practice matters more than how much you practice at a certain point, right? Let's say you're learning a new technique. Maybe it's a switch kick or a kind of sweep or a specific counter. Some fighters, let's say within a round or two of doing the drills, they can practice it switching between them and their partner. Let's say 50 reps each side, boom, done. And in a moment, it feels great. You get into like rhythm. You know exactly when your sparring partner is going to throw something. Your body starts to remember the movements, and you walk away feeling confident. Like, yeah, okay, I got this. But then you get into sparring, and then suddenly that confidence is gone. You can't access it. It doesn't show up when you need it. Why? There's something called contextual interference. If there's low contextual interference, it's when you repeat the same skill over and over without variation. So it can be like that 50 consecutive times you did that very particular sweep with a training partner who doesn't move around or has very predictable timing. This low contextual interference, it makes you feel good during training because there's kind of less factors to worry about. And your performance in that session looks great, but it doesn't transfer to live context. It doesn't transfer to sparring and competition. Because in a fight, you're not against someone, and also in sparring, you're not against someone who's just going to be standing in place and having predictable timing and just doing that one thing. You know, there's punches being mixed in, teeps, knees, defense, movement, and then all these things are kind of like randomized in a way too, right? It's not like when you're fighting, the person you're fighting is going to tell you exactly what they're doing next. So when your brain has only practiced that one technique in isolation, and in that context, in that way, it doesn't know how to reconstruct it on demand when everything else is happening at the same time. Now let's talk about what if the contextual interference is high. Now this is when you mix multiple skills together in a single session. So if we go back to that sweep, we can talk about during the sweep, but before and after, there can be other elements mixed up, such as like a jab cross or then like teep or then the clinch entry and then back to doing that technique again. So there's a lot more moving parts and it is more advanced because there's so much going on that your brain is trying to figure out like timing and all this stuff. So you actually perform worse during training under these high contextual interference moments. It feels messy, it feels really hard. It might even feel like you're not improving at all. But then when you actually test that skill later, in sparring, under pressure, in a fight, it's there. Your brain has learned to reconstruct that movement on the fly because it's been forced to do it over and over and over again in different contexts, even if you didn't do it quote unquote well in those different contexts. It's better than it being this very sterile, very predictable environment with a low contextual interference. And this concept is backed by research. High contextual interference leads to better retention and transfer and skill transfer. Most Muay Thai practitioners, sometimes they choose to do the low contextual interference thing because it feels more manageable and their progress of doing that movement and skill it seems more tangible in the moment and also makes them feel better about themselves in a moment. But when you practice with high contextual interference, your brain is constantly forgetting and reconstructing the action plan for each skill. Every time you switch from teep to a switch kick or the other way around, your brain has to rebuild that motor pattern. And that process, that reconstruction, is what makes the skill stick. It's what makes it transferable from training to sparring or training to competition. So it's very interesting how we have two things where one, look amazing during training, but not necessarily able to throw it off in a real life situation. And then also the other way around. Oh, I feel like I suck at this. I would never be able to throw this off in a fight. But because you're giving a lot of the different variation, random movements, your brain is better able to reconstruct it in a live, high pressure situation. And there's also another layer to all of this. Even when you're practicing a single technique, varying the context of it kind of makes that single technique more stable. So for example, you throw a switch kick while you're standing still. Then you throw a switch kick when you're moving forward. Then you throw a switch kick when you're moving back. Then you throw a switch kick after you feint. Then you throw a switch kick after you jab. The principle of variety means that the movements that contribute to and that surround that skill enhance the carryover. So even though that main component was a switch kick, the context of how you throw that switch kick is really, really different. You're making that switch kick far more applicable in different circumstances and with different timings. And in my opinion, this is what's so cool about it. Regardless of the speed or the effort that you apply to a technique, even during training, there are three things that remain constant: the order and the sequence of movements, the relative timing of muscle group activation, and the relative force ratios used. What this means is you can practice at a slightly reduced speed or effort level, maybe because you're tired, maybe because you're just actually working on being precise with where you're targeting, and you're still building that core skill structure. You're still banking quality reps. So if you want your techniques to actually show up when it matters, you really need to embrace being uncomfortable during like random practice, aka high contextual interference, and vary the context around that particular skill. Okay, let's move on to another tool, and something that most fighters have never heard of, but it's a game changer. It's called spaced repetition. You know, when you're learning vocabulary for a new language, there are apps that quiz you on words right before you're about to get them. So if you've ever used any of the language learning apps, this might sound familiar to you. Or if you remember taking your second language while you were still in school, this might also sound familiar to you. That's spaced repetition. And it turns out that same principle applies to physical skills and not just cognitive ones like learning language. Muscle memory is actually a function of mental memory. Why? Because your brain controls everything. Your brain controls your body, your hands, all of your movements. So just like mental knowledge, physical skills benefit the systematic scheduling to ensure how you review those skills before the memory itself is gone. So here's how you can apply it. You can use a spaced repetition system, whether it's like with flashcards or like an app when it comes to learning a new language or studying, or like actually a physical log to schedule practice. So in Muay Thai, how do we do this? You want to create prompts as your reminders. So make a card. So it could be a physical card, it could be a digital card, it could be a notes, it could be a task entry on your to-do list, right? For each technique that you're working on. It could be as simple as like practice foot sweep or drill the teep off of the jab. Focus on weak points. The beauty of spaced repetition is that it helps you systematically schedule practice and focus on the techniques that you're worst at. If you have 20 different defensive techniques to master, this system ensures that you review the hard to remember ones more frequently than the ones that come more easy to you. And you want to supplement this with extra time on the mat. So if you're able to stay a little bit longer after training or show up to training earlier or use like free training time to do it on the bag or with a partner. You use the spaced repetition to review the sequences, vocabulary, and also the more detailed tips for a complex skill for when you're not actively training in a group class. This also strengthens the knowledge of that skill. So when you actually get to training, you can focus on moving that skill into muscle memory. So actually doing it and incorporating it more into automation. If you want an analogy, you can kind of think of it like if you need to practice 20 different defensive techniques, using spaced repetition is kind of have like a digital training partner who tracks which defenses you master quickly and which ones you tend to forget. So instead of drilling all 20 equally every single day, which is just brute force more than anything, this system ensures that you review the hard to remember techniques more frequently, maximizing the retention that you have and focusing you don't have time to train all day. You have limited training time. So you're able to focus that limited training time precisely where your brain needs that extra push and that extra reinforcement. Just know that there is still some debate about whether or not spaced repetition is as effective for really long, complex sequences as it is for shorter sequences or shorter skills. Longer procedural sequences, so we're talking about things that involve like a 7-piece combination, which in my opinion are not that effective for a real life situation anyway. Those kind of sequences may benefit more from continuous repetition, but if we're talking about most other things that we're learning from like a high quality Muay Thai class, a high quality coach, spaced repetition is definitely a tool worth using. On to the next, concept. Training order matters more than anything. And this is something that I wish someone had explained to me years ago. The order of how you structure the training sessions matters. It's not like as long as you do everything within that hour, then it all is the same. And I don't just mean like, do cardio before strength or do strength before cardio or whatever. What I mean is like what you train first depends entirely on what your goal is for that session. So if you're learning a new skill or trying to fix a bad habit, then you need to train that skill while you're fresh and not while you're tired. Not while you're fatigued, not at the end of class when you're already drained. Because when you're fatigued, your technique is already breaking down. When you're drilling a new concept, a new movement with bad form, your body is just too tired to be able to do it properly. So you're not only kind of wasting time in a way, but you're reinforcing a bad movement pattern. And it takes a while to actually undo those patterns. Don't forget that every time you do a movement, whether it's good or bad or non-intentional, your brain is banking that movement. So if it's a poor movement, you have to unlearn it later. If your goal is skill acquisition, so learning something new, refining technique, eliminating a bad habit, do that first before anything else. But when it comes to something called skill testing, that's different. That's taking a skill that you already have. So already completely different from skill acquisition because that's talking about skills that you don't have. So if we're talking about skills that you already have, something that's solid, something that's been drilled and retained, and you test it under fatigue to make sure it doesn't fall apart when you're tired. But again, this only works if the skill is really already within you and it's already robust and proven under pressure in some ways already. You can't test a brand new technique under fatigue because you just break the foundations of it for so many ways. So again, I need to reiterate, the training order matters when you are trying to focus on one or the other. Skill acquisition, so new movements always go first. Skill testing, so skills that you already have and have a history of being able to use well and are part of your quote unquote muscle memory. You can practice this on the fatigue to kind of stress test it in a way, if you will. Now, what if you're doing multiple sessions in one day? Let's say you're doing strength and conditioning in the morning, Muay Thai in the evening, or if you only have that 3-hour block for the whole day that you need to do weightlifting and Muay Thai kind of like back to back, what do you do then? In that case, you should train your more important session first. So if your goal is to master a brand new Muay Thai technique, do Muay Thai first and then strength and conditioning after. So again, back to what we said about skill acquisition, you're best at acquiring new skills, banking good movements in a non-fatigued state. So hopefully based off that, you can figure out why Muay Thai goes first. However, if your goal, the more important goal to you is develop maximum strength, power, speed, so on and so forth, and this is more important at the moment than learning that new Muay Thai skill, then you want to do strength and conditioning first, Muay Thai after. Ideally, you want at least 3 hours between one session or the other to avoid kind of doing too much in one period of time, because doing too much in one period of time can kind of blunt the training effect of the other. But, you know, sometimes we only have a limited amount of time. We don't always have 3 hours to rest, or even the privilege of being able to train more than once in a day. Also, if you're a fighter, there's research that shows training strength and power in the morning leads to better performance at any time of the day, which is important because you don't always know what time you're going to fight. Training in the evening can cause your performance to peak only during that time, which is good if you only fight in the evenings, which I think is for a lot of people who are on those one-off shows. But if you're fighting in a tournament, that's like kind of an all-day thing that starts fairly early in the morning. It means that your performance can drop off a bit if your fight is kind of in a different time frame than when you usually train. Now, how do we progress the training phases? In the early phases of your training, you should focus on movement, mobility, and strength. So we're talking about like longer duration, lower effort. So we're rehearsing new patterns and changing the techniques. Later on is when you want to transition to power and speed. So this is going to be the opposite. It's going to be shorter duration, but higher effort. So you're testing those skills under fatigue to make sure they're still sharp when you're tired, which is important in something like fighting, because most fights will make you very tired and you still need to be sharp. You still need to keep your hands up. You still need to be able to fire back and your body's going to be able to respond. If you just automatically jump to the fancy plyometric stuff, high intensity fatigue training, then you're reinforcing sloppy movement. And you can apply this to both Muay Thai and strength and conditioning. So in the beginning stages of your Muay Thai journey, definitely focus way more on basics, foundations, movement, being able to move your body, the range of motion, you know, kind of doing like the boring stuff. But once you have that as a good base, then that's when you can transition into more of like the more high intensity stuff. Okay, so we've talked about how to structure your training in order to maximize your learning. Now we need to talk about something that doesn't actually happen within the gym, and that's processing what you learned. That's where recording, writing down your training comes in. I like to do it in the form of journaling. Not everyone does, but because I prefer journaling, I will talk about journaling, but feel free to replace that term journaling with something else. Journaling can feel like such a self-help cliche, but please, I want you to hear me out. Journaling is not just about writing down your feelings and what happened that day, recording every single little thing. It's more about reflecting, capturing patterns and new techniques before you forget them. And by doing that, you are solidifying the lessons from training so they actually stick, so you can actually refer back to them. And the most powerful way is actually pen to paper, pencil on paper, but the actual like act of writing on paper. And there's some science behind that, because writing by hand engages more areas of your brain than typing does. It forces you to compose and recompose your thoughts, especially since writing is a little bit slower than typing. And that in turn increases memory retention and deepens your emotional processing. So I actually learned this because I was a psychology major while studying in college. When I took the class that had to do with understanding research and processing data from research, the professor did tell us the act of writing down stuff does something so special to your brain that if you are trying to like take notes and just trying to make that process go further so you don't have to spend more time trying to study it and memorize things later on. He said the best thing he could recommend for anyone is to literally handwrite notes down and handwrite things when studying, because of the whole process with how it engages your brain that we just talked about. So on top of actually like what it does to your brain, journaling also gives you a safe outlet, I guess, to express your frustration, anxiety, disappointment. There's a lot of stuff that comes with being a fighter, but we don't always have the people and the spaces to talk about that. And sometimes writing them down, it can be very cathartic because you are reorganizing your thoughts and finding a way to express everything in a way that feels very raw and real. And when you reflect later on how you've overcome challenges in the past, it builds mental resilience. It helps you bounce back faster after setbacks because guess what? You wrote it down, you have proof that you've been here before and you've gotten through it. The act of writing also increases your likelihood of achieving them if we're talking about writing down your goals. Not just thinking about them, but actually like physically putting it on paper. It gives the goals weight. It makes them feel real. And when you track your progress in a journal, technique focus, mental preparation, recovery strategies, you're creating accountability. You can look back and see patterns. You can adjust your training based on what's actually working and not just what you think is working. Journaling also promotes self-awareness. It helps you track patterns in your mindset and behavior. It helps you identify strengths and weaknesses. It helps you spot mental barriers that are impacting your performance. For example, maybe you notice that every time you spar with a certain person, you freeze up. But maybe you wouldn't have noticed that pattern if you weren't actively reflecting on it. And you can even go deeper than that. You can use journaling to uncover subconscious beliefs. You can have targeted prompts that you write into your journal that can help you explore your underlying fears, your motivations, your true motivations, your stressors that impact performance. You can ask yourself questions like, what fears do I have about competing? What past experiences shape my current mindset? What does my identity look like beyond this sport? How do I react to failure and why? And none of these are easy questions. They're pretty existential, but they are the ones that help you understand why you train the way you do, why certain situations trigger you, and why you make the choices you make. So this is a very good self-reflection tool for building self-awareness and growing as a person. Another way, if you're not yet ready to kind of break open that kind of worms about yourself, you can also use journaling to study the successful athletes and fighters that you admire. You can write about what it is about their mindset, their work ethic. The really famous fighters, they have interviews all over YouTube. You can watch their interviews. You can identify the specific behaviors that they have that you want to develop. And then from there, once you have those very specific qualities in front of you, you can create an action plan for implementing those strategies in your own training in a way that is effective for you. And this isn't just like, oh, I'm fangirling, I'm fanboying. You can use this as an opportunity to actively learn. And if you want to talk about even just beyond how it could benefit you, we can talk about being part of a team and training dynamics. So even though Muay Thai feels like an individual sport in a lot of ways, you're training within a community. You're training within a gym. You have coaches, you have teammates. So you can never really truly be by yourself. You can use journaling to reflect on your interactions with teammates and coaches. How did I support my teammates during their challenging moments? What leadership opportunities did I miss or take? How can I improve communication with my coach or my sparring partners? This helps you become a better training partner, a better student, and a better learner. And I also think in turn, it helps you be able to not just learn things about yourself, but it gives you the vocabulary, I think, to be able to set better boundaries. If you're part of a team or a tight-knit gym, you can also consider doing some kind of group-based reflective practice. Research shows that reflecting in small groups can enhance skill performance, self-confidence, self-awareness, and increase motivation. And this in turn can help you achieve greater gains, greater things than just individually reflecting alone. So this group reflection gives you the chance to relate to each other's problems and provide constructive feedback. It also helps to build the culture of the gym. You can also use journaling for mental rehearsal, write out a perfect performance scenario, describe your ideal pre-competition routine. You can visualize what success looks like. This can help you build confidence and primes your brain for actual performance through neurological preparation. Visualization is really powerful. Some people that I know that journal every day, and forget about just like Muay Thai, but just journal in general every day, something really powerful that a lot of them do is they start their days by writing down what they're grateful for. And this kind of sets the tone for the rest of the day for many of them. It puts them into a more positive state of mind. And that positive state of mind leads into a more positive story for the rest of the day. And that's so important for your inner dialogue, how you speak to yourself. If the way you speak to yourself is more positive, then that in turn leads to a more effective strategy, more effective way of implementing things, right? So the state, the story, the strategy frameworks. I like to share with you some prompts that I use in my own journal. I like to reflect on what went well today. What did I learn? What needs improvement? What patterns am I noticing? So this could be good or bad. What am I grateful for in my training? What am I grateful for in my life, in my situation, no matter how, negative things may seem. And it's not to allow that gratitude to overshadow or discount the negative things I am going for. In a way, for me, just having things that I can still be grateful for, even in a negative situation, it's like a light in a very dark tunnel. You don't have to write essays, just 5 minutes after training, capture something, capture what you notice, capture what you learn, capture what you want to work on next. And you can get started with the journaling with just a plain traditional notebook, spiral notebook, as long as you have something to write on that you would enjoy using. It offers that tactile therapeutic experience that aids in emotional processing. If you're more of a digital person, which a lot of people are nowadays, especially since they're more portable, you don't have to think about like physical clutter. A lot of apps offer convenience, organization, search functionality, and you can even include media like photos or audio notes. So there are journaling apps that allow you to do that. There are some places on the internet where you can kind of print out reflective sheets. So these are guided worksheets with specific questions to help prompt your journaling in a way. And this is good if you are not great with like a blank notebook kind of journaling and you want something with more structure. I'm going to plug something very quickly for myself. I have a free download on my website. It's a monthly Muay Thai Training Journal. It's just for 1 month. You fill in the dates of the month yourself and the days of the week, so on and so forth. And then there's a little bit of guidance and some free space for if you want to draw, if you want to make notes, things like that. So I made that a few years ago, and everyone that I spoke to that downloaded, used it, told me that it was amazing and that they continuously use it for themselves, digitally or like on paper. That I made my first annual one for the year 2025, and I just recently released the 2026 one. So again, it has prompts for reflection, space for tracking, room to process the hard stuff. Is designed by me in the way that I like to journal so that people get better at noticing themselves and logging their journey and remember all the stuff that they learned. And if you want to check that out, the link is in the show notes. You can also search on Amazon 2026 Muay Thai Training Journal. Okay, we've covered how your brain learns, how to structure practice, advanced retention tools, and how recording your training helps you to process it all. So let's talk about something that happens in real time during training and also your fights. Your inner dialogue and mental state. You're always talking to yourself, whether or not you realize it. And research shows that positive self-talk improves motivation and performance. And now your internal monologue, how you talk to yourself, can be very different from how you talk to others. I know some people who are very optimistic people that speak to others in a very optimistic way, but they speak to themselves in a negative way. So I just want you to know that you can't necessarily tell how someone speaks to themselves just from how they speak to others. Athletes who use self-talk, especially when they try to intentionally make the self-talk more positive, they experience a few things. So they find that what they're doing is more fun, it's more interesting, and there's more higher effort value, and that they're more competent in what they're doing. And when it comes to self-talk, there's two types. There's instructional self-talk for technical execution. So maybe things you tell yourself silently, hands high, hips forward, breathe. There's also motivational self-talk. And this is more for enduring Things like, I can do this, or like, okay, just one more round. Keep pushing. You got this, 30 seconds left. And if you don't know how to talk to yourself, especially when things are hard, focus on what is within your control. Instead of saying, don't miss the kick, you can say something like, take a step forward before you kick. So rather than giving you this giant area of like, do not do this, but no instruction of how to actually do it better, you are giving your brain a more bite-sized manageable task. Instead of saying, don't get hit, you can tell yourself, keep your guard tighter. So try to replace negative commands with positive ones in order to get that desired outcome. However, if you do find yourself to be someone who tends to use a lot of negative commands to yourself, there's something that you can do in order to bounce back. If after you make a mistake, or if there's a bad round, you can use this tool to bounce back from what has already happened and refocus on the present. For example, some athletes, if they can, they pinch some pieces of grass and they throw it away, which symbolizes letting the mistake go. Some others, they acknowledge their negative emotions and then they tap their gloves together twice in order to be like, all right, new round. It doesn't really matter what it is that you do that's unobtrusive to your training. What it matters is that it kind of gives your brain a physical cue in order to move on from negativity and to focus on the present and what's coming next. I had mentioned visualization earlier. Visualization, it's also called motor imagery. It's a dynamic mental state when you simulate a physical action in your mind. And I don't know if you've ever done it before, but it's actually a little bit hard to do, but it's also fun because when you are doing it, you do feel like you're locked in and doing the thing. So sometimes you might feel like your body is moving by itself. Mental practice, thinking about you pulling off a specific technique or thinking about you training or going through the movements of training, it causes neuron growth that mirrors the growth caused by physical practice. Visualization is used everywhere. It's used in neurological rehabilitation to help patients recover balance after strokes. It's used by surgeons to reduce stress before operations. It's used by musicians when they're away from their instrument. Studies show that visualization retain the properties of the real actions. When people mentally walk through a narrow virtual gate versus a wide one, they take longer to mentally pass through that metal gate, just like they would in real life. What this tells us is that your brain doesn't fully distinguish between something you imagine versus the real action. So when you visualize yourself executing something perfectly, you're actually priming your nervous system to do it for real. So if you're trying to sleep, maybe it's not a great idea to start visualizing fighting because it's going to amp you up. Okay, now let's talk about breathing for performance and recovery. Deep breathing isn't just for calming your nerves. It also accelerates recovery. Taking deep breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth helps to allow more oxygen into your lungs. That in turn speeds up recovery from physical fatigue. So if you needed another reason to not be a mouth breather, this is it. Breathing this way also helps to regulate the nervous system. It helps you feel less anxious and more in control. You can use this technique right before a fight. You could use it between rounds. You could use it after a hard session. So anything where you kind of have to bring your heart rate down and just recenter yourself. Kind of based on a lot of the points that we've already talked upon, we can talk about, I guess, VR, virtual reality. VR is now being used to train visual perception, decision-making, and anticipation skills in environments that are difficult to replicate safely or consistently in reality. So maybe we're talking about like fighting or contact sports like rugby. VR allows for controlled manipulation of visual conditions. For example, research shows that an athlete's actual performance improved after training in VR when the virtual targets were larger, so kind of perceived as easier, and decreased when the targets were smaller. VR combined with eye tracking can systematically analyze and train visual attention, like where experts look earlier and for longer. If you want to take surfing, elite surfers analyze waves differently than beginners. VR can also use graphic aids like numbering and arrows for step-by-step instructions and augmented visualization like a virtual mirror comparing your movement to a coach's to provide immediate feedback. And this is a future of training tool. It's already here in a lot of ways. My partner has a VR headset and I've played quite a few like boxing sparring games on it and also different like sport and coordination games. I can't say for sure whether or not it's translated into my Muay Thai because I haven't done the data testing and like gotten a benchmark for all that stuff, but it is cool that it is accessible to us already. Okay, last thing. And it's the most unsexy thing probably of this whole podcast episode, but it's also the most important. And that is sleep. If you're not sleeping, nothing else we talked about today matters. Research shows that athletes who sleep fewer than 8 hours per night are 1.7 times more likely to sustain an injury. Sleep deprivation decreases reaction time, increases errors, and makes you more prone to mistakes under pressure. Now, there are different cycles of sleep. But when it comes to REM sleep, it's when your brain consolidates memories. So this is essential for motor learning and skill acquisition. If you're not getting enough REM sleep, you're not able to retain what you practice in the best way. But non-REM sleep is when your body repairs itself. That's when growth hormone is released, and that growth hormone is so critical for tissue regeneration after training. Sleep because you need it in order to actually learn better and retain the stuff better, and also for your body to recover. You should aim for at least 2 hours of rest and recovery for every hour of high intensity training or competition. This is according to some scientific guidelines. You can check my sources for this in the show notes. And according to best recovery guidelines, you should avoid like super early morning training sessions because they disrupt your circadian rhythm, whereas late afternoon training is more ideal. So keep in mind that with these guidelines, these are kind of like an optimal situation kind of thing. So in the examples of me training in Thailand for my first 4.5 years here, I woke up at 5 a.m. every single morning because we had to start running at 5:30 and then training started at 7. We would train again in the late afternoon, so that couldn't really be helped. And also for some people who work full-time jobs, the only time where they can train because of their work schedule is early in the morning or late at night. So I'm just saying what the research says. Hopefully you can find a way to implement some of these, especially the sleep thing, into your life. Try to maintain a consistent bedtime. Try to go to sleep and wake up around the same time every day while trying to get at least 8 hours of sleep a night. So prioritize sleep like you would prioritize training, because without the sleep, in a way, you're kind of just like spinning your wheels or going through the motions. Thank you for sticking with me all the way until now. And let me leave you with this analogy. Think of your Muay Thai training like learning 2 different kinds of music, if you are a musical person. So playing scales and performing a complex song. If you practice with low contextual interference, so doing the same thing 100 times in a row very predictably, that's like playing the same simple scale repeatedly. You feel great while you're doing it, but when the band starts playing a song in competition that has a lot of things going on, your brain won't know how to access that skill when it's mixed in with everything else. But if you practice it in high contextual interference, mixing that set technique in with kicks, knees, defense, movement, it's like interspersing your scales throughout different complex songs. It's harder during practice, but your brain becomes adept at reconstructing that technique on demand, making it transferable when the pressure hits during sparring or in a fight. So this is how you can train harder and not just smarter. Structure your sessions, pay attention to training order, use spaced repetition to focus on your weak points, vary the context around each skill to make it more applicable, aka by embracing high contextual interference, even when it feels messy and it doesn't feel so great for your ego. Record your training or journal it to process what you're learning and go deeper than surface level reflection. Control your inner dialogue. Visualize success. Develop some rituals to help you bounce back from a bad moment or a mistake. use your breath, and on top of everything, get some sleep. Your future self will thank you. And that's it for today. If you found this helpful, share it with a training partner. And if you want more content like this, follow Ying, the podcast. I know that these days I've been a little bit slower than usual releasing the podcast. I've just been so swamped doing everything. I know I've said this so many times. Like, I'm just one person trying to make content for all these different platforms, writing and editing and whatnot. So I really am doing my best. So thank you for supporting me. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. And again, if you're interested in the Muay Thai Training Journal, either as a free download monthly where you fill in all the dates yourself, you could get that on my website. If you're interested in the annual 2026 Muay Thai Training Journal, where it's already filled out for you, has some prompts and some blank space in it for you to kind of customize it how you want, you can also check that out in the show notes, or you can just search it directly on Amazon.